Listen, I love when car companies bring back some of that nostalgia to their car designs. And this is the 2023 Ford Bronco Sport Heritage Edition. And as you can see, we do have a beautiful white grille. We also have the white roof inspired by the 60s. I'm not entirely sure about this Yellowstone yellow that we have on the exterior, but I do think it's still cool that they added a spec like this to the lineup. So what we're going to do in this video is, of course, have a look at the spec and tech of this, because this is a 4-cylinder. It's not the 3-cylinder. You have 250 horsepower in this thing. Then we're going to talk about the design from a front, side, rear view, the interior, which also has a little bit of some old school vibes to it, which I like. And then, of course, we're going to take this for a drive. Under the hood, we have a 2-liter EcoBoost 4-cylinder putting out 250 horsepower and 277 pound-feet of torque, connected to an 8-speed automatic all-wheel drive with a locking rear differential. 0 to 60 takes 6.1 seconds. Fuel economy comes in at 21 city, 26 highway, and the price for this is $44,655. Starting with the front end design of the 2023 Ford Bronco Sport Heritage Edition in Yellowstone yellow. Looking at the front end, I love what Ford did here, and this is one of these projects that's you just have to look at the design sketches of the entire Bronco project. You can see that the designers absolutely had a blast designing these two cars, this Bronco Sport and the big Bronco. Now, this being the Heritage Edition, meaning that we do have this beautiful white grille, which I like. As I said, this in contrast with the red letters in the grille, in addition to the yellow, looks a little bit weird, but it still has that beautiful vintage look to it, and I'm glad they decided to put this into production, even though the color combination itself might not be my personal taste. We also have a clear separation between the top graphics up here and the lower section with a clean bumper, and this is also bringing back some of that old school styling that we had in the cars. What I love about this Bronco Sport is that under here we have a proper skid plate further down, and the ground clearance is 8.8 inches, which is not bad because this is not a body-on-frame car, and you still get those off-road capabilities in this small package. Now, looking at the Bronco Sport from a straight front view, you clearly see that this is nothing else but a Bronco. They really nailed the design identity. We have this big full LED headlights, and in the Bronco Sport, you see that this LED in the middle cuts in to the grille. We also have this round headlights, bringing back again some of that 60s and 70s design that we had in the old original Broncos. We also have these openings here. So this grille in the lower section, these holes here in the underneath the letters are open, but up top they're closed off. We also have the opening right here in the middle. A couple of more design details I love in the front end is these big bulges that we have going on top of the hood. It just makes it feel more industrial and brings in that boxiness that the big brother definitely has, but also I want to see that in the small Bronco Sport as well. And I think these help bringing back that rugged feel that we want to see in a Bronco. As I said, the designers had a lot of fun designing this car. In general, Ford right now is kind of a company that I wish I was a designer for at the moment, because I think they're currently nailing pretty much every single design they come out with. As you can see, the white continues here in the side view. We have these 17-inch alloy wheels. I know they look like steel wheels. Well, these are actually alloy wheels, 17 inches, painted white, of course, to be in line with the roof in the front end. We have Falcon Wildtrak all-terrain tires, 29 inches. It'd be cool to see this with 33-inch tires on it to fill out the wheelhouses a little bit more, and also have the wheels stick out a little bit further than what we have here. We have a nice shoulder line cutting through here. We don't have this beautiful shoulder line that we have in the Big Brother, where it has a clear 70s inspired shoulder line, not something that we don't see in pretty much any car today. Instead, we have a pretty rounded shoulder here, but we do have this 70s style indent in the lower section. Again, coming back from the hood design, this also feels a little bit more industrial and rugged, just having a simple indent in the lower section right here. Another small little detail that brings back that old school car design is the font that we have on the side on the door. Look at this beautiful Bronco lettering here. It says Bronco Sport with the horse. Reminds me of the old muscle car styling when it comes to the font of the design, and it shows that the designers didn't miss the small details when it comes to bringing back a retro inspired design. Moving further back here on the roofline, you can see that we have this tiny dip here, and I've talked about this before, that when you have a smaller sibling. You have the big Bronco, for example, being a lot more static and boxy than this, even though this is still pretty boxy. But when you have a smaller sibling in the lineup, you can add a little bit more styling to the design. You can see that going on here, specifically with this big black piece, which I think looks pretty good actually in this case. You have still a window back here, in addition to the contrasting white roof and this small little bulge that we have going here. Now this is the Heritage Edition, meaning that it comes standard with a sunroof that we're gonna have a look at when we look at the interior later on. Coming around to the rear view, and I think this industrial feel still is intact in the rear, because remember the lower section that we have in the side with this indent, that same style of indent comes back right here. One thing I'm a little bit confused by is in the front end we do have the white grille, meaning that we can't really have the white lettering on top of a white grille, so instead the front letters are red, but in the back we have them being white because they sit on this Yellowstone yellow background. Now it does have some cool openings here. You see down here we have, it says glass here, so if we press this button you can actually open up the top part to just throw in some small stuff if you want to do that. And you can of course also open up the entire hatch by pressing the button to the right. I like the simplicity of this design. For example, have a look at the shoulder line here, this big chamfer, and how it's rounded comes back in this area, in addition to the pretty industrial looking taillights. Again, coming back to that more functional, rugged design, coming back into taillights. These are not entirely LED, because you can see that we have the indicator being a regular light bulb, while the daytime run light or the brake light around it is LED. I think it looks fantastic, this rear end. We also have a clear, simple plastic bumper in the lower section, meaning that you don't necessarily need to be too careful with the paint being scratched when you're taking this off-road. Overall, the exterior design of the Ford Bronco Sport, specifically in this Heritage Edition, I think I would probably go with the blue one. This yellow looks cool if that's your style, but for me personally, I like the blue one better. But the overall design of the Ford Bronco Sport and the Bronco in general, which I've also reviewed here on the channel, I think Ford absolutely nailed the exterior design. Welcome to the interior of the Ford Bronco Sport Heritage Edition. Let's fire this up because it is a little bit chilly outside. It's 26 degrees. This is the last day here in Colorado before we're gonna have a week of a negative degrees. So I'm glad I'm filming this car today. So I talked about the exterior design and how we have this nostalgic feel to the exterior, and that vibe definitely comes back in the interior. And the ruggedness also is visible here. So let's start up top. We do have some hard plastic up here. I think that's fine because this is the highest trim level you can get for the Bronco Sport. You can get it in a much cheaper base model, so having some hard plastics all around up top is not a big deal to me. We have the 8-inch infotainment screen, and this is 8 inches. This is what used to be standard back just a couple of years ago, and I think 8 inches is completely fine size for me. I don't want a bigger screen than this because it wouldn't be as nicely integrated between these air vents as we have right here. We also have more old school vibes in the gauge cluster because the gauge cluster, the tachometer and the speedometer are all analog. Again, totally fine for me. We have a nice cap for it. I wish the cap maybe was a little longer, further out this way to cover and have the gauges sit a little deeper in the dash, but it's totally fine because we still have a center display that is LED, of course, and you can have a bunch of different settings here. I prefer to have it visible in the off-road setting because it shows you the angle of the steering wheel, it shows you the angle of the front tilt and the side tilt in degrees as well. I think that looks pretty cool. The gauge cluster is a lot similar to the one that we have in the Ford Maverick, which again, it's a fantastic gauge cluster. It does everything that I need it to do. Now looking at the design here and this ruggedness that comes back, because when you look at how these air vents are integrated in this design, we have this nice white coloring here. I think this is cool because this comes back to the white exterior that we have. Some features in here that brings back that same vibe and color scheme that we have on the exterior. We also have some physical buttons down here for the radio, the volume control right here, and this comes with a Bang & Olufsen sound system. This being the Heritage package, comes with pretty much everything you can get in a Ford Bronco Sport. Now, further down, we do have a storage compartment here. This is not the wireless charger, even though it is rubberized. I think you can take this rubber piece out and clean it if you want to. You have the start button right here next to the steering wheel, which is great because it's not covered up by the steering wheel. You can see it at all times. You don't have to like fiddle around and figure it out where it is. Further down, and this is something that I want to see more in cars today, in modern cars, is all these physical buttons and big rubberized dials. Looks like a tire on the exterior for the dials for the temperature control. Easy to adjust. You have heated seats and you have heated steering wheel as well. You don't have cooled seats in this, but it looks like it should have it because there is one single empty button here that would be nice to have the cooled seats button for it. Very easy to figure out where you want the air to blow from, the fan speed, and all the heating settings. Very intuitive and a lot easier than having everything be integrated in the infotainment screen itself. Now, the infotainment screen, it does come with Apple CarPlay. However, it's not wireless in the Bronco Sport. You have to plug it in with a USB cable. This screen itself, it's pretty responsive. You have the navigation here if you need it. If you don't use Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, you do have the native navigation here as well. Audio settings, a bunch of different apps and settings to set the car up exactly like you want to. Below the climate control settings here, you do have the wireless charger located right here, rubberized in an angle, and it also has ridges next to it so your phone is not going to go anywhere. You have a USB and a USB-C here in addition to a 12-volt outlet. This is the command center right here in the middle because you have this massive dial for the the gearbox. You have parking, reverse, neutral, and drive. If you put it in the reverse, gonna pop up the backup camera, which doesn't have the crispest resolution, I wouldn't say, but you do have trajectory lines when you move the wheel. You also have the parking brake, and of course, this being a Bronco, it comes with the GOAT modes. And you have, I do believe, let's see how many drive modes you actually have here. We have normal, eco, sport, slippery, mud ruts, sand, and last but not least, rock crawl. And the cool thing about this, again, this is not a body on frame SUV, but you still get a locking rear differential. So not bad at all. That in addition to the 8.8 inches of ground clearance, it makes, and the tires, the Wildtrak all-terrain tires, it makes this into a pretty capable off-road little SUV. All the buttons for what I just mentioned are located here with this GOAT mode dial, locking rear differential, locking four-wheel drive, hill descent control, and traction control on and off. And this is what the key looks like. Pretty normal key like that. I'm going to zoom in on it so you can see it clearly, and it says Bronco on the back. One detail I love in here, a small little design detail, is this badge. It says established 1966 Ford Heritage Edition Bronco, and you see the nuts and bolts here. These are pretty much the only nuts and bolts you can see in here, and they make up the front fascia of the Bronco itself. Again, this is what I'm talking about when I say that the designers, both the exterior and the interior, they must have had a lot of fun designing this car. Looking at these seats, I love the finish of them, but again, there's a little bit too much coloring going on here. We have brown seats, white and yellow black interior with the red lettering in the front end. But these seats by themselves look fantastic and they're very comfortable, heated as I mentioned. You have the Bronco logo embossed into the backrest right here. And I do like the white stitching that we have here in contrast with the brown leather. You also have a pretty normal sized armrest here. I'm glad that we do get an armrest because I like to just rest my arm here when I'm driving long distances. It's cool to have. You have some nice storage under here with two more USB-C ports underneath there. Up top, as I mentioned, the Heritage Edition comes standard with this big sunroof that we can open up fully or close or do whatever we want with. Now, looking at the steering wheel, this is probably the one thing that I would like to change for this interior. I feel like this design, specifically down here in the middle with this chamfer, it looks a little dated. It looks a little 2010-ish to me, but it's not a big deal. You have all the controls for the gauge cluster settings on the right side in the right spoke, and on the left spoke you do have the controls for the cruise control settings and the volume buttons, in addition to the paddles for the 8-speed automatic. And honestly, this is a pretty fun car to drive, specifically with the 2-liter EcoBoost turbo engine that we have under the hood with 250 horsepower. It feels a little bit jumpy in some situations, specifically when the car is cold, but other than that, the driving experience, which we're going to talk about in a minute, is really good for this type of package. Another detail I love is here on the stock. I can't stand most of the driver assist that we have today. So I don't want to have, for example, line keep assist on. And the good thing is that Ford decided to put a specific button for turning that off right here on the indicator stock. So if you want to turn it off, you just click this button. You don't have to go in to this infotainment screen in the software to just turn that off. And that is something that I do every time. And in addition to that, it doesn't reset to being on as soon as you start the car. It's such a funky, cool car, this Ford Bronco. And honestly, even though the yellow looks a little weird, I like it because it is weird and unusual and something that we don't necessarily see a lot of manufacturers putting into production today. So with that said, we talked about the exterior, the front end of the interior. Let's jump back and see if I can fit behind my own driving position at 6'1". All right, jumping in to the back seat. I haven't been here before, so this is gonna be a first to see if I fit behind my own driving position up front. And I do. It's pretty tight, to be honest. If I have my legs straight, it's gonna be very tight to sit like this for a very long time. But I usually have my legs outside of the seats, which is totally fine. Look at the quality here. We have a zipper for the pouch that you get back here. Very nicely done. And again, you have more pouches here on the side to put maybe your phone or something like that in the sides of the seats. And if we fold this center armrest down, you are going to find yourself 2 cup holders here in the middle. Overall, a beautiful interior. You do have a lot of space back there as well, this being a very boxy design as we talked about. And you also have some 12-volt outlets and some house outlets in the trunk, for example, if you want to clean it out and plug in a vacuum cleaner. Alright guys, taking the 2023 Ford Bronco Sport Heritage Edition for a drive. Let's put it, well, why not put it into sport here, because I know this is not a sports car really, but since we are on this sporty road, might as well. Keeping it in auto for now. I drove the 3-cylinder version of this, and even that was fun to drive, and that also has the manual transmission on it, the manual capability with the pedals. I don't know what it is about this car that makes it such a fun, I don't know, it shouldn't be this much fun to drive a Ford Bronco Sport, but I think that they just did some magic with the chassis, because this feels great on roads like this. And this being the Heritage Edition, you also have, it's pretty capable off-road with the tires, as I said, the ground clearance. You have the locking rear differential and so on. Let's put it in manual mode. So you have this little M here on this transmission dial. Now we're in manual mode, down to 3rd. Up to 6,500 RPM. It sounds pretty good too. 250 horsepower. In this type of small package is definitely, in my opinion, you don't really need more power than this. And honestly, I thought the 3-cylinder was powerful enough already, but if I were to buy a Ford Bronco Sport, I don't really know if I would pick this one, the 2-liter EcoBoost 4-cylinder, or the 3-cylinder, because both of them are very rev happy, and they feel energetic in a way. It's a weird way to explaining it, but they feel like neither of them lack power. Down to 4th here. Shifts are decent. They're not the quickest. You wouldn't expect that really. Takes about almost a second from when you hit the paddle to when it actually shifts. I think maybe the downshifts are a little quicker than upshifts. Handling is great, even though we are on these Falcon Wild Peak, I do believe they're called, these all-terrain tires. Road noise is fine too. Not a lot of road noise, even though these are the more aggressive all-terrain tires that we have on this specific Heritage Edition. Let's pop it back into automatic. Even though it is a fun car to drive, it's not really a car that I would, you know, pop into manual and do some sporty shifting with a lot of times. It feels like it's more suitable to stay in automatic. I think Ford is just crushing it these days. I think we need more cars like this that brings back some of that old school vibe when it comes to the exterior design, because I think it's also a great selling point. People love to have these retro inspired designs back into production. And what I love from sitting here is that those bulges that we talked about on the hood, I can see them clearly from where I'm sitting. I can also see the wings that are kind of creating this border for the front end. And it feels like, if I just sit here and look at the hood, it definitely feels like I'm driving something from the, you know, an SUV from the 60s or the 70s. Now, a couple of things that are not, you know, top notch with the Heritage Edition is, first of all, the fuel economy is not fantastic. It's not too bad either. And the pricing above $44,000 for this Bronco Sport, I'm not sure if I would pick the Heritage Edition. I would probably pick another trim level, since as I said, I'm not a huge fan of the Yellowstone yellow, but maybe keep the price around $40,000 for a Bronco Sport. The reason being, I think this stands out from other crossover SUVs with the off-road capabilities that we have in the Bronco Sport that are not really available in a lot of other crossover SUVs in this segment. But it is quick. You got 250 horsepower, and 0 to 60 in 6.1 seconds for a Bronco Sport. That is quick, and it feels pretty quick as well. Overall, it's a cool car. I love the design, I love the exterior, the interior design, even though stuff in here feels a little retro with the analog clusters and so on, that I don't really mind at all. I think it's a cool design that we need to see more of from other manufacturers to bring back some of those classic designs that they had way back in the day, 50 years ago, and modernize those with new technology, of course. And I think if more manufacturers do that, they're also going to sell more cars.